Welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be discussing No No Boy by John Okada. And this is a book that I've known about for some years. It was just always on my to-read list, and as time goes on, obviously things move up your to-read list. And I'm very glad that I finally did get to this. I've started to subscribe to the theory that in life, you read the books that you're supposed to when you're supposed to. And I've stopped saying, oh, I wish I'd read this so long ago, or why did it take me so long to read it? I think very often we're supposed to read a book when we're supposed to read it. And I feel this was just the right time for me to read No No Boy. I was on a recent long road trip in the United States and reflecting on how the U.S. has interacted with all the different races, religions, nations of people that have spent time on its soil. This is one of the more recent cases because the Japanese internment hasn't even been 100 years since that happened. For those who are unfamiliar with the Japanese internment camps, these were when non-citizen Japanese, so first generation people who had come over, who are referred to as Issei, I-S-S-E-I, and their Nisei children, N-I-S-E-I. So these are American citizens who were born in the United States to these Issei parents. They were forcibly evacuated from their homes to concentration camps. I know that's not a pleasant phrase, but there's no other way to put it. Whatever you want to call them, prison camps, relocation camps, you can call them whatever you'd like, resettlements. They were moved forcibly from their homes, moved under armed guard, and put into these facilities, often dreadful facilities. They were still allowed some pleasantries, mail delivery, food. I don't want to give you the sense that it was prison conditions they were put into, but definitely suboptimal. And this isn't the book for that. Interestingly, No No Boy is a book that assumes that you know there was this evacuation, and it hangs like a shadow over the book, but that's not the goal of this book. The goal of this book is to deal with one particular No No Boy and his story of return. Now, what does No No Boy mean? So, if you were a Japanese American at this time, you were posed a series of questions, but the two most infamous questions that the War Department asked young Japanese males were questions number 27 and 28. Question number 27, are you willing to serve in the armed forces of the United States on combat duty wherever ordered? Question number 28, will you swear unqualified allegiance to the United States of America and faithfully defend the United States from any or all attack by foreign or domestic forces, and forswear any form of allegiance or obedience to the Japanese emperor or any other foreign government, power, or organization? So, while there were some Japanese who answered yes to both of these questions, if you answered no to both of them, you were known as a No No Boy. And what happened was you were then found guilty of draft evasion and were arrested, and you were taken to a maximum security prison for the rest of the war. Now, I don't know that this review is the place for me to get into the appropriateness of that punishment for these answers. I do know from reading some more accounts, historical accounts outside of this book, which is a novel, right? It's a novel very much based in history, but it's not a documentary. It's a novel. That some of these men who answered no could not get over the fact that their civil rights had been trampled on, and then they were being asked these questions. I think they wanted to be asked these questions from the comfort of their own homes, not while they had been evacuated to a camp. And so their no's had different nuances behind them. These were no's of, you could say, of principle. And the idea that kids who had grown up in America had some sort of allegiance or obedience to the Japanese emperor was definitely something that was planted in the mind of higher ups in the government who really thought that there was this vast sleeper group of Japanese living on the West Coast ready to betray America at any opportunity, especially since we know now, and we knew then, that Pearl Harbor was the greatest stretch for the Japanese. It took everything they could to get that far. That's an 8-hour flight from the west coast of the United States. The idea that a few Japanese on the west coast would somehow provide the opportunity for a rebellion on the west coast was a big stretch. I understand it's wartime, and I understand that people get hysterical, but I think what this book and any other literature around this time period underlines is it's a lot easier to get hysterical by people who don't look like you. And the open question available to anyone to answer is, even though we were at war with Germany and Italy, with many more immigrants from Germany and Italy, and some just as recent as the Japanese, why were they not interned? Why were the Japanese singled out to be interned for everyone's safety for the rest of the war, but German and Italian immigrants were not? And I think the answer is quite simple. They don't look different. That was the great mistake of the Japanese, is for them to look different from what was considered a typical American person. Because at that time, even in this, I would say very clearly in 1940s, what the idea of an American was set, and it was not Japanese. And despite the fact that there was no evidence of subversion or bad conduct, and we now have government reports that show that the Japanese were even, shall we say, more patriotic, more hardworking, less prone to crime, less prone to any sort of problems, they were disproportionately punished. And yes, there have been some mea culpas from the U.S. government, but disproportionately so. There were millions of dollars, if not more than millions, confiscated, lost, and we're talking about compensation that happens in the hundreds and thousands of dollars. So we weren't ever even able to concentrate. We weren't even able to compensate them for all the losses that they suffered. The other thing that's interesting about this book, so as an aside to what I just talked about, sometimes people get really upset when you want to have a conversation about, well, when you say Black Lives Matter, there's a larger narrative behind that. So some people, they think this is some attack on their parents or grandparents or their way of life. And so any further discussion on Black Lives Matter and associated ideas must come from commie libtards, which is absolutely crazy. Of course, the idea that there is racial injustice, that is a real thing. It cannot be chalked off to a few fringe elements. It is something that is persistent in U.S. society. It's something that's singular. And until it's acknowledged and addressed, we can't make progress. As long as we try to say, well, it's just a few things, or all lives matter, or blue lives matter, that you're not really listening to the issue here. And so part of addressing, and why a book like this wasn't popular in its time period, it was published in 1957. It had only been 10 years since the war had ended. A lot of the wounds were fresh. A lot of the Japanese were trying to move on, so they didn't really want a book like this that highlighted problems. But it's not popular today, even when it's published and available and comes with reprints and introductions, forwards and afterwards by scholars, that it's still not a book that's acknowledged. I'm certain I'll be one of the few book reviews on YouTube for it because it's simply not a book that's given the attention that it deserves. It's not the finest work of literature ever, but it is an important work of literature, the only one from this particular author, that not only gives us insight into history, but also tells the story, and this is where I want to wrap up the video, the deeper story, the deeper truth. What does it mean to be between two worlds? So in this particular case, being born to parents who come from a different universe across the ocean, and they're raising you somewhere that is different from where they are. And this is something this is a theme near and dear to me, because obviously being biracial, coming from both white and Chinese ancestry, I'm sensitive to the fact that this is a challenge. And this isn't anybody's fault. It's not anybody's fault, that you're caught in between two worlds. These are choices that are made for you. These children didn't vote to move. But what this passage I'm going to read you, and it's from in this edition, the University of Washington Press edition, all of page 16 and part of page 17 captures beautifully and poignantly this in-betweenness. And I think you'll also, I hope this gives you an appreciation for the quality of writing that's in the book and will attract you to reading it. "No," he said to himself as he watched her part the curtains and start into the store. "There was a time when I was your son. There was a time that I no longer remember, when you used to smile a mother's smile and tell me stories about gallant and fierce warriors who protected their lords with blades of shining steel, and about the old woman who found a peach in the stream and took it home, and when her husband split it in half, a husky little boy tumbled out to fill their hearts with boundless joy. I was that boy in the peach, and you were the old woman, and we were Japanese with Japanese feelings and Japanese pride and Japanese thoughts, because it was all right then to be Japanese and feel and think all the things that Japanese do, even if we lived in America. Then there came a time when I was only half Japanese, because one is not born in America and raised in America and taught in America, and one does not speak and swear and drink and smoke and play and fight and see and hear in America, among Americans, in American streets and houses, without becoming American and loving it. But I did not love enough, for you were still half my mother, and I was thereby still half Japanese, and when the war came and they told me to fight for America, I was not strong enough to fight you, and I was not strong enough to fight the bitterness, which made the half of me, which was you, bigger than the half of me, which was America, and really the whole of me, that I could not see or feel. Now that I know the truth, when it is too late, and the half of me, which was you, is no longer there, I am only half of me, and the half that remains is American by law, because the government was wise and strong enough to know why it was that I could not fight for America, and did not strip me of my birthright. But it is not enough to be American only in the eyes of the law, and it is not enough to be only half an American and know that it is an empty half. I am not your son, and I am not Japanese, and I am not American. I can go someplace and tell people that I've got an inverted stomach and that I am an American, true and blue, and hail Columbia, but the army wouldn't have me because of the stomach. That's easy, and I would do it, only I've got to convince myself first, and that I cannot do. I wish with all my heart that I were Japanese or that I were American. I am neither, and I blame you, and I blame myself, and I blame the world, which is made up of many countries which fight with each other and kill and hate and destroy, but not enough so that they must kill and hate and destroy again and again and again. It is so easy and simple that I cannot understand it at all. And the reason I do not understand it is because I do not understand you, who are the half of me that is no more, and because I do not understand what it was about that half that made me destroy the half of me which was American, and the half which might have become the whole of me if I had said, yes, I will go and fight in your army, because that is what I believe and want and cherish and love. Defeatedly, he crushed the stub of a cigarette into an ashtray filled with many other stubs and reached for the package to get another. It was empty, and he did not want to go into the store for more because he did not feel much like seeing either his father or mother. He went into the bedroom and tossed and groaned and half slept. So, I hope that you enjoyed that tiny excerpt from what is not a long novel, 220 some pages, and there's an introduction and an afterword. No Boy by John Okada. Recommend not only to maybe your first Japanese American author, be exposed to that, but also be exposed to some realities of American history to get to know American history better, whether you're an American or not, so that we can understand the truths of our existence as opposed to, as always, what the media tells us. If you'd like to support these reviews, obviously please leave a thumbs up if you do subscribe to the channel. But if you'd like to leave a donation or donate on a recurring basis, there's a Patreon, which I'll link to in the comments in the description of the video. But otherwise, until next time, enjoy your reading.